Hello everyone, bringing a video today looking at a set of the Australian modified M-1956 ammunition pouches. These of course being based on the US design. These were introduced during the course of the Vietnam War and were used right the way through the end of the 1980s and even into the 1990s in some instances. So quite a long-lived design. They do draw heavily on the US design of M-1956 pouches, the way they attach to the equipment and so forth, but they're expanded to give a bit greater carrying capacity. So we're going to have a look at these in some detail now. So here we have a pair of the Australian M-1956 pouches. These were issued as a pair like this, but they are in fact identical. They're not a handed pair, much like their US progenitors. So you'd just be issued two of the same, basically, unlike say 1958 pattern and 1944 pattern, where they are made in a left and right handed version for various reasons, obviously the various features found on the pouches. These aren't a handed pair, they're identical. Various details of the design can be seen here. They are taller than the US M1956 pouches, which we'll see in just a minute or two. There's also a stiffening piece in the front, so we'll see that in a minute when we open it up. Big broad arrow stamp on the front there, which is indicative of Australian issue, very common to see on various pieces of the modified M1956 equipment. Quick release tab here, which is more similar to British practice than it is to the US version found on the US M1956 pouches. This is very similar to that used on the preceding Australian F1 pouch for the F1 submachine gun. You can see here we have nylon binding around the edge of the flap there. You see details of the construction of the flap or the lid there. On the side of the pouch we have a webbing loop in common with the US design. This could of course take a slide keeper or Alice clip as they would later be known, or of course the spoon of a grenade, and then the grenade could be secured using this strap around the side here. Not particularly common in Australian use. You tend to see things clipped on the side here. The straps were often used to carry a toggle rope hung around the bottom of the pouch. See at the bottom here further details of the construction, the stitching there, and an eyelet for drainage worked into the base of the pouch there. If we turn this over here, you can see details of rather nice clear handwritten details there of the previous user of this, person this was issued to, with their number there as well. I think there's some nice graffiti under the flap as well, which we'll see in just a minute. You can see how the side straps fasten round onto this webbing piece at the back here with press studs or snaps, and then you have, in place of the US just crimped ends on the webbing, you have riveted ends, riveted blackened brass fittings on the end there, in common with other British and Commonwealth webbing. So this is a feature brought across from previous Australian webbing, the 1937 pattern, a little bit more durable than the crimp tips. And then the standard slide keepers, which were a standard feature of M1956 and would be carried across to the Alice equipment of course. And these, you simply slot the belt into there and then slide them closed. If I can show that properly, a little bit difficult to do in the camera. The little stud, little tab on the end actually fits into a hole in the bottom here, little slot to keep them secure. So quite an effective way. I quite like slide keepers. I think they're quite a good way of doing things, much as you end up with this on the inside face of the belt actually against the body. I still think this is quite a good way of doing things. You have here a strap for supporting these. This was in common with the US M1956 design, although this is slightly modified. So the idea is that the suspenders have a D-ring up on the shoulder, or up towards the shoulder, the base of the shoulder, and this would then clip up to that when these are on the belt to help support the weight, because as you can see from where the clips are mounted on the back, it actually sits quite high on the belt. So this stops the idea of this is to hold the pouch up and stop it sagging away from the body. So taken directly from the US design there. If we open up the flap here, this is the little piece of graffiti I was talking about, so foo with the eyes worked in there. And that would suggest to me that whoever was issued this was the forward observation officer, an artillery spotter basically. But really rather like that, nice thing to have. You can just see the date here of 1972 and then the stock number underneath the flap there. The stamps in the other one are nowhere near as good as this, so that's the reason I'm showing you this one. You can see that the throat of the pouch has nylon edging as well. Details of the interior there you can see. And then the front of the pouch is actually made of the waterproof material that was also used to make the cover of the Australian collapsible bladder canteen. And it was used inside the Australian pack, the field pack that was part of this modified equipment as well, or at least associated with it. And it originally had the same camouflage pattern as you'd find on the Australian waterproof coat, which is black and green, sort of splodge effect. And you can just about see that there, it's wearing off. But inside this, there's simply a piece of plastic to form the stiffener in the front of the pouch. So that's the Australian modified version of these. I'll just take this one out of the way now. Let's say that one is identical to the one we've just looked at, and bring in a US pouch here. And hopefully this clearly illustrates just how much bigger the Australian pouch is compared to the original US design. It's also slightly deeper as well, so if we look at the side here, you've got much greater carrying capacity in there. This is a second issue US pouch, so it's had the stiffening piece, that the second issue of these, the US removed the stiffening piece from the front, so it is just a soft webbing pouch, there's no stiffening in there at all. The Australians reintroduced it with their version. I mean, these are sort of contemporary. Production switched in the early 60s for the US to this version. Obviously these would be the ones in production by the time Australia introduced these pouches, so they essentially reintroduced the stiffening piece in the front. Not entirely sure on the reason for that, but it certainly doesn't detract from the use of the pouch. The much greater carrying capacity is what they were going for with these, of course, and this was in part due to Australian troops being used to the 1937 pattern pouches and the 1944 pouches, which did give a greater carrying capacity, so it addressed that issue with these. These were designed, obviously, initially as something of a universal ammunition pouch. They were primarily designed with the on-block clips for the M1 Garand in mind, and then, of course, the M14 magazines. They would, of course, carry magazines for the standard Australian rifle of the time, the SLR, but nevertheless, a greater carrying capacity was desired. Australians, of course, were using the L2 as well. At least in Australia, they didn't use it in country as far as I'm aware during the Vietnam War, but the intention of these, of course, is you can then carry the larger magazines for the L2 as well, so it fits into the Australian doctrine in that regard in terms of the small arms that they were issuing, not actually using in country, as I say, but it would give that the ability to use it with that weapon going forward. So various reasons for introducing the enlarged pouches. These were introduced around 1968, or certainly they start to turn up in photographs in country in 1968 in a big way, and they were used through the end of the war and then into the 1980s and even into the 1990s in some instances, when of course they were replaced by the DP camouflage uniform, DPCU, and the DP equipment that went with it, DP being disruptive pattern, of course. So just have a quick look at these, turned around against each other here and next to each other, just so you can see the details, obviously, that have been carried across. It's a different way of doing things with the strap here, but the function is exactly the same. You see the difference between the ends on the webbing there, the little straps. But otherwise, taking the various features, the outer features of these, and the way they're supported and so forth and attached to the belt, but the pouch itself is quite different. And obviously the quick release there. If we just fasten this one up again, which is a little bit tricky, doing it again looking through the camera. There we go. You can see the quick release there, somewhat different as well. So that's a quick rundown of these pouches, a quick comparison to the US progenitor here. As I say, you can see how the Australians modified these for their own needs. So I hope you found it interesting looking at these. Quite a key part of late Vietnam War Australian kit, and as I said previously, carrying on in use right the way through until the end of the Cold War, basically. So quite an interesting, quite a useful bit of kit to have in the collection. Was very pleased to pick up a nice set of these. I've had quite a heavily worn set for a little while, so it's nice to pick up this set, which we've looked at in the video, which is fairly tidy. A little bit of graffiti here and there, but otherwise pretty tidy. And I want to say a big thank you to Steve Cheers in Australia, who very kindly assisted me in locating these and locating a decent set of these and obviously sending them over to me. So thank you very much once again, Steve, for your assistance with this. I hope you found it interesting, as I say. If you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.